Okay, so good afternoon, everybody. And today we have a very interesting talk on reverse migration, circular migration, multiple migration. So this, your audio is on. Okay.
Yeah, so can I start?
Just 1 minute, I'll introduce you. Actually, the other one is coming. So we have Dr. Sabah Khan. Actually, I need not to introduce her. She has been already there in earlier talk she has given. So Dr. Sabah Khan, briefly I'll tell you, she has been one of the contributor for this program as a unit writer, and now she's working as guest faculty in Ambedkar University, Delhi. And she has been also helping in many other ways to develop this program. And over to you, Sabah, and we'll have around 45 minutes followed by question answer.
Thank you, sir, for the introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. I would like to welcome you all once again to this lecture series on migration and diaspora. So in today's lecture, we will try to talk about migration, and we will try to look at least go beyond the conventional idea of migration, which usually means movement of people away from the place of usual residence, either across international borders or within a state. So what we will do is that we will try to understand migration beyond these binaries of countries of origin and country of destination. Why so? Because now what we are experiencing is that an increasing number of people migrate multiple or several times during their lives. And it is this aspect of migrating more than once, which we will talk about today, especially in reference to reverse and circular migration. So, in today's lecture, we are going to cover these topics. We will talk about, firstly, we will try and understand what is meant by return migration or reverse migration. We will look at the different types of return migration and the impact that returnees and return migration may have on the home societies or their country of origin. And thereby we will be able to differentiate between what is reverse migration, what is circular migration, and followed by twice migration. So let's first start by looking at what is return migration. Now, when we talk about what is return migration, we can understand it in terms of migration back to one's homeland. Now, this is, of course, a very simplistic understanding of what return migration is, that you migrate back to your homeland. Now, here again, the aspect of vacation or short visit is not included in this definition of return migration. Return migration is where a migrant goes back to his or her home country after living in another country for a certain period of time. And the sheer number of returnees has made this phenomena important enough for academic attention. Now, if you look at some of the recent trends and the data, as per the data offered by International Organization for Migration, in the year 2021, around 50,000 migrants were assisted to return to their country. to their country of origin. And over 16,000 migrants were assisted to return from only the European Economic Area in 2021. And these include countries like Germany, Greece, Belgium, and so on. So these numbers can, of course, be contextualized in the context of how the pandemic triggered reverse migration, where workers were forced to return in face of unemployment and lack of housing and so on. So they were forced to return to their homeland. So reverse migration can also be seen in terms of the post-pandemic migration. Now, the United Nations Statistics Division has defined return migrants as persons returning to their country of citizenship after having been international migrants in another country and who are intending to stay in their own country for at least a year. Now, this definition points to different dimensions, such as, firstly, the country of origin. It talks about the place of residence abroad. It talks about the length of stay in the host country and length of stay in the home country after return. So these are some important dimensions that we need to keep in mind when we talk about return migration, because the length of stay has a lot of influence on return of migrants. Why? Because the longer a migrant stays in the host country, the less likely it is that he or she will return home to immigrate to a third country. So we need to understand return migration in terms of these dimensions of length of stay and so on. So when we talk about return migration, it can be very complex. So as you can see from the first figure, the first picture shows that there are two countries involved, two countries in consideration. First is the country of birth, the country of origin, and second is the country of destination. So there is an initial migration, and then after a period of time, there is a return migration or reverse migration to the country of origin. Whereas in the second figure, there is a country of initial migration, that is the first country of initial migration, followed by a second country or second migration, and then eventually a return to the first country of migration. So in other words, here from the second figure, we are able to understand that one can migrate more than once before actually returning to the country of origin. So there is migration more than once. But when we talk about return migration, there is a considerable sloppiness and difficulties in defining return migration. And one of the difficulties is in terms of remigration, and whereby it is important to understand that migration for the second time does not imply a return to the place of origin. So in addition to that, there is also an issue in terms of re-immigration. First was remigration. Now this is re-immigration. That is, people move back to their homelands and then immigrate a second time. So to put it in simple words, when people return after immigration for the first time to their country of origin, we use the term return migration, as you can see from the first figure. When people move on to a second destination. We call it transilient migration. Here people move from A to B to C. Now, when people immigrate to a new destination after having returned, we call it second time migration. So it is apparent that the return migration is not a homogeneous category. Return of migrants may or may not be voluntary. So it can be voluntary migration or it can be involuntary return migration. And these two types, the two main types of return migration, firstly, like I mentioned, the voluntary return, which involves a voluntary decision on the part of returnees when people decide consciously that they want to return to their country of origin. Now, this can, of course, have several reasons behind it, but there is a conscious or a voluntary decision made by the individual. It can be spontaneous return in terms of that it does not that the return is done without the support of the state or any other national, international assistance. Return can also be assisted voluntary return. Now, when I use the term assisted voluntary return, it implies that there can be that there is some kind of administrative logistical support which is offered to the migrants who are unable to return on their own for some reason. So this would mean that there are asylum seekers and migrants who are in need of assistance by some kind of external agency. The second type of return is the forced return. So forced return involves some kind of force and compulsion to return. And an example of forced return can be how sometimes people are expelled from a country or they are ordered to leave, especially in cases where they are rejected cases of asylum seekers and so on. So they are left with no choice and they are forced to return to their country of origin. So there are various types of return migration. One can classify these various types of return migration into four ideal types. First is the intended permanent immigration without return. Second is the intended permanent immigration with return. Third is the intended temporary migration with return. And lastly, intended temporary migration without return. And you would notice that in this typology of return migration, we have dealt with two dimensions. As you can see, first is the length of time migrants intended to remain abroad. And second is the reason for returning. So these two dimensions of length of time that people live abroad and the reason have an important role to play. So there are people who who had intended their immigration to be of temporary nature, and there are those who intended it to be permanent. So in the former usually return to their country of origin after they have accomplished the specific objective that they have set out. And in most cases, this objective is to accumulate some amount of money, and then they would return. You would see in most stories of migrants, or if you watch any video on migration or any movie which talks about migration, you would notice that the initial intention is that I will go, I will earn certain amount of money, and then I will come back to my home country. So this is when your intended objective, you have a set objective in mind. and you know that your migration is going to be temporary in nature. The second type, hope for more permanent immigration, but for various reasons. Sometimes people are, they decide or are forced to return to their home country. Now, there are different reasons which explain uh, return migration. These can range from failure of integration in the host country to failure to achieve the set objective, or simply one's preference for one's own homeland. These are some reasons which we see when people decide to return to their country of origin. In other cases, some people might be forced to return due to family circumstances, like there can be cases of ill and old parents, or there can be some ongoing financial instability in the host country. So these are all reasons which can put one in a situation where one is forced to return to their home country. Uh, then there are those who feel this constant alienation, or they feel that there is this strangeness of language, people, customs, or simply because they are not able to bear the psychic costs of being separated from your family and friends and a familiar environment, so to say. So there is this homesickness that creeps in. So there are these different reasons whereby people are forced to return. And if you see, there are these core features which come to fore whenever we talk about a typology of return migration. And these core features can be listed out as those who intended temporary migration. And in this case, the time of return is pre-decided on the basis of objective that they set out to achieve at the time of at the time of immigration. So those who had originally intended to migrate, who had originally intended to immigrate permanently and had intended to stay indefinitely in the host country, but were forced to return due to external factors. And thirdly, there are those who intended permanent migration but chose to return. And here, some of the reasons, like I mentioned earlier, could be the failure to adjust, or homesickness could lead to their decision to return. So there are these different or various reasons that come to fore. There are several cases of returnees, and we will discuss some of the prominent ones. So to start with, one of the most prominent cases of returnees to India is from the United States. And here we, as most of you must be familiar, that there are these cases of Indian professionals who had been very successful in the US. They got good jobs, good pay, and who, after spending years in the US, returned to India. And some came back during the period of 2000 to 2004, when jobs in the US IT industry dried up in the aftermath of a slump. And this is again happening yet again, as you must have seen in the news and read that there are these mass layoffs which are happening in the United States. So some of the very known companies, Amazon and Meta, two of the biggest tech companies, laid off several employees in 2022. Google also laid off around 12,000 employees. and Amazon sacked 18,000 employees, and so on. So there are these different companies, Microsoft, and there is a long list of companies who are indulging in these mass layoffs, and it's still continuing. They did it last year in 2022, and it's still continuing in 2023. So in 2022, companies with foreign national employees, they experienced layoffs and hiring freezes, so to say. So around 78% of companies instituted a hiring freeze, and 51% of companies laid off foreign national employees. So the people who are laid off H1B, these workers, they scramble to find another job because they only have a grace period of 60 days. And in that grace period, they are to find another job and, make sure that they have a valid visa. And in these circumstances where people are being laid off and they are scrambling to find another one, many are forced to return to their country of origin. And this is something that is happening now. This is not something that happened long back. It's happening right now. And this is not just the case with a particular country. There are several such cases of return migration. And another example is which comes from is the state of Kerala, which sent significant workforce to the Gulf countries and is now experiencing return migration. It's been happening for quite some time. And in the aftermath of global economic and financial crisis, some of the policies have also a very important role to play here, because some of the policies were promoting native employment in terms of the Nitakat policy of 2012, whereby they had a preference of employing natives of their own country in proportion to people from foreign nationals. So in addition to that, there are internal conflicts among Gulf countries. And all of these factors have resulted in return migration. And in addition to this, in post-COVID period, there were huge flows of returnees. And in this scenario of the pandemic, Kerala announced several rehabilitation schemes and projects for these returnees, such as they had announced relief funds, for instance. So each eligible return immigrant received a sum of 5,000 rupees as a one-time benefit. They were offered capital fundings for some ventures. And these relief schemes like Sinthavana, which aim to provide financial support to return migrants. So this is just one example of a state which realizes the potential of its returnees, and the fact that every third household has an immigrant going to Gulf countries and so on. So they do realize that they need to provide some kind of assistance to these return migrants, and especially in the context of the pandemic, these schemes were very essential and very much required to assist a smooth rehabilitation of these return migrants. Now, one has to understand that returnees have a huge impact on home societies. And one of the most striking effect of return migration is its influence on further immigration. So return migrants bring back valuable industrial work experience, They bring back skills which they have learned abroad, and as well as, of course, the capital which is needed for economic development of their homeland. So they bring back all these resources and skills. So the contribution of returnees to the development of their homeland can be understood sorry, in terms of the education and work experience they received abroad. So here, of course, the aspect of the savings and the money they collected while they were abroad is also very important. Uh, when they bring back that kind of savings, they, of course, help their home country in terms of improving the market performance, in terms of building new businesses. They can start new ventures with the knowledge that they gained abroad. So they do contribute a lot to the development of their home country. And the contribution can be understood in terms of the combination of these services that they provide on their return. Like I mentioned, from their education and their work experience, the money and the social income that they bring with them, all of that in combination contribute to the development of their home societies. Now, this, of course, paints a very rosy picture in theory. But as far as the empirical studies of return migration are concerned, some of these claims may not really stand ground, as some of the empirical studies done on return migration point out that a great majority of these migrants work as unskilled jobs while they are abroad, and few only return with work experience, which can be considered important to the development of the home economy. And some of the reports have actually highlighted how these workers actually received very little training while they were away, and on their return, they do not obtain better jobs, or they are only semi-skilled. And even if they do acquire some kind of technical and industrial skills, there is a good chance that they will not be able to apply them at home. Primarily because the rural areas from which most migrants originate, it lacks the infrastructure needed, which is required for an effective use of their skills. So there is, of course, this gap in terms of the contribution of returnees in some of these studies which are done, and the grassroots reality can be a little different. However, overall, we can't deny that the returnees do contribute a lot in terms of their knowledge, skills, and the capital that they bring back. Now, of course, the question of how do they use that capital, whether it is for personal consumerism to alleviate their social status, or whether they actually contribute to the development of home society, is something that can vary from case to case. So when we come to emphasize an important aspect of migration that has come to fore in the recent past, which is the fact that people experience multiple migration. The migration from country of origin to a first country of destination, and then after a period of residence and work, the migrant might choose to go to a second country of destination, and so on. And this is something that we have been emphasizing throughout the lecture today, that there is these multiple movements across borders, which is there. And an important aspect is that it involves at least two or more international movements across borders. So there can be two or more international movements which are an important part of multiple migration. So similarly, when we talk about circular migration, it is important to know that returning home does not necessarily mean end to the migration pathway. Now, this is something very important that we need to highlight, that whenever we are talking about return migration, it does not mean that there is an end to the migration. It can still continue because people can migrate again. So here, and there is often tendency that you will migrate again. And here comes the idea of circular migration. So whenever we talk about circular migration, it is a process by which people migrate, they return to their country of origin and then migrate again. So it refers to this repeated migration experience between and country of origin and destination. So there is repeated migration, and it involves that migrants sharing work, family, and other aspects of their lives between two or more locations. So circular migration is the repeated back and forth movement between home country and one or more countries of destination. Now, some factors play a very crucial role in this type of migration. And these can range from having a family in the home country or education. Now, those with family back home may opt for repeat migration, while those less educated, sorry, tend to migrate less. So just to reiterate that once again, people who have a family back home will obviously have enough reasons to move back and forth. And people who are less educated will, of course, have more difficulties in moving. So there is this tendency to migrate less. And an example to understand circular migration can be of migration which is happening in the Gulf countries. So South Asia has, of course, contributed a lot of workforce to the GCC, where foreign labor comprises an absolute majority in the GCC, like Kuwait, Qatar, and so on. So most of this workforce is actually unskilled. Like they work as construction workers, truck drivers, they work as domestic servants, and so on. So they remain in these positions for shorter periods of time, and then they switch. So migration to the region is organized, or let's say governed by what is called as the kafala system or sponsorship system. So this system mandates an association between each labor migrant and a sponsor in the Gulf. And these contracts actually lock migrants to particular jobs. Like they will be bounded that they can only do this particular job under one particular sponsorship. So these contracts lock migrants to particular jobs for a particular period of time. And the kafala system is structured in a way to only grant migrants opportunity for temporary cycles of employment. And migrants may choose to engage in repeated cycles of employment within one or more GCC states. So it actually leads to circular migration because their contracts are figured in such a way that they will only be working for a limited period of time, and then they have to go on search for another sponsor, and then they engage in these repetitive cycles. And according to Zimmerman's study, the rates of circular migration were more than around 60% among the guest workers in Germany. And similar is the case with Pakistani migrants in Norway and so on, and Turkish migrants in Germany. So there are these several cases where people engage in circular migration. There are, of course, some dimensions which come to fore when we talk about circular migration. These can be of space, time, repetition, and scope. So the space dimension pertains to crossing of a border. And while in terms of the time, circular migration involves stays of a limited duration that can vary from months to years and so on. And it does involve at least 2 time back and forth movement between a country of origin and destination as a minimum requirement for circular migration. Of course, different studies have pointed out different criteria to understand circular migration, and some of them can be understood as residence of temporary nature, as a renewal option that which involves possibility of multiple entry. Thirdly, there is circularity, which implies that there is freedom of movement, which can be exercised without restriction during the period of residence. And there is a legality of stay, there is a satisfaction of a temporary demand for labor in the destination country. So these are some of the criteria whereby migration can be characterized as circular migration. And circular migration is, of course, it implies that it is a triple win situation. And this triple win situation would mean that it provides gains to the countries of both origin and destination, as well as the migrants themselves. So in the countries of destination, it can alleviate labor needs and increase economic production, while in the countries of origin, it can provide, it can look at the unemployment relief aspect, and it can provide financial and human capital. And when I say that, it means that they offer skills and resources which they bring back. And as far as the individual benefits for the individual migrants are concerned, it can be seen in terms of the increased income, it can be seen in terms of greater work experience. So, of course, all these aspects are relevant and, actually help this proposition, or let's say substantiate the proposition that circular migration is a win-win situation for everyone. And as you can see in the picture in the slide, it is just a way to help you understand circular migration in a very simple way. And this figure illustrates that the migrant has left country A twice and returned twice. and is creating a sequence of A to B to A and then again. So this sequence consists of at least more than 2 moves, or let's say 4 moves, and completes at least 2 loops. So uh, these 2 distinct moves away from and 2 distinct returns to the country of origin can be one of the ways to understand circular migration. There is an important challenge in administering or recording or in measuring circular migration, because how are different countries supposed to keep a record and to measure circular migration? Now different countries approach it in different ways. For example, Germany analyzed statistics from Central Register of Foreign Nationals for informants, and they use this information on migrants' exit and re-entries. So they use that data to keep a record of the circular migration. Then Netherlands, for instance, identified individual migrants using unique citizen service number, BSN, provided to them after residing for more than 4 months. So another example is of Sweden, which counted migrants who had been residents for at least 12 months. So there are these different methodologies which are employed by different countries in order to measure circular migration. Now, circular migration is, as you all will be able to now differentiate from return migration, which refers to a single immigration and return, unlike circular migration, which involves repetition of movements. So now you can differentiate. Circular migration would mean repetition, unlike return migration. And third category of migrants can be called as twice migrants. Now, what does this term twice migrant mean? Twice migrant is understood in reference to secondary migration. Now, this term was coined by Baku in 1985 in reference to the third or higher generation Indians who had lived in East Africa for a few generations, and then they remigrated to the United Kingdom in the aftermath of post-independence Africanization policies that were taking place. So when Idi Amin took control of Uganda, he expelled the supposedly foreign Asians, and since they had access to Britain, they migrated to the UK. So the twice migrant is used to refer to people who migrated from India to East Africa and then to Britain. So, sorry, this term is now used in reference to Italian Bangladeshis also. Why so? Because Italian Bangladeshis are relocating to London, and most Italian Bangladeshis move to London to escape the socially limiting factory work in Italy, or to invest in the educational future of their children, and to join the largest, one of the largest Bangladeshi communities outside their home country, which is in the borough of Tower Hamlets of London. So they believe that joining that would be culturally, educationally beneficial for the future generations. So this term twice migration can be understood in reference to secondary migration in the context of whether it is the East Africans
who migrated to UK or to the more contemporary Italian Bangladeshis. And there can be, of course, several other examples which you can include in this category of twice migrants. So to sum up, whatever we've discussed so far is that we can say that there are different types of migration in which return migration and returnees figure prominently. We try to reflect on the complexity of return migration, which now we understand that it is not a linear process happening from A to B. It can involve migrating or migration more than once before actual return. So the typology of return migration vary, and it can vary in according to the length of time that migrants intended to remain abroad. It can vary in terms of the reasons for returning. So there is this difference as far as the typology of the return migration is itself concerned. And in discussion of this typology of migration, we noted that multiple migration is on the rise. And as you can see, like we discussed throughout the lecture, different cases, like we talked about circular migration, we talked about secondary migration, how this return migration itself is not a linear process. So we do note that multiple migration is on the rise. And unlike the earlier focus that we had on here and there, that is country of origin and destination, the post-colonial focus is more on dislocation and the multiplicity rather than the binaries. So this is all that I had planned to discuss in today's lecture. And with that, I end today's lecture. Thank you all for listening.
Sabah.
Yes, sir.
Okay. If there are any questions to Dr. Sabah, you can ask. It was, very interesting talk, but will be more fruitful if you can ask some questions and get clarification. Vijay can share some of the Gulf related, reverse migration to Kerala, Andhra Pradesh and all. Even Swadesh, you are handling lots of reverse migration.
Yes, sir.
Good afternoon, everybody, and good afternoon, sir.
Yes, please go ahead, Vijay. Then Swadesh.
Let's for this speak. Come on.
Okay, so
Thank you.
Sabah, I will just tell few words about Swadesh and Vijaya. Swadesh is heading one NGO, Prabasi Mitra in Andhra Pradesh, and she's managing lots of return migration. Okay.
Oh, that's wonderful.
So
Yeah,
he has lots of experience of their challenges, rehabilitation, and also Swadesh, you can ask few questions if you have.
yeah.
You can also share your own experience of working with these returnees, actually, so that we all can, get some insight into that.
Yes, ma'am. Recently, due to COVID-19, many migrants coming back to their homes. It is a very big problem to accommodate them to get livelihood here also. It is a big challenge. That much workers coming back to Telangana. And here they don't have such government policies for the migrant workers who coming back to source country. Rehabilitation, reintegration, there is no such plans. That's why they're thinking again to remigrate to destination countries, ma'am.
Okay, now
Uh,
see, that's some interesting points that he made. If anybody would like to add to that or comment on that or comment on the lecture today, please feel free to do so.
Okay, Vijaya is settled in Kuwait for last, I think, 20, 30 years. And she is also very much, very much involved in migration related thing and community affairs in Kuwait. So Vijaya, anything to add?
Yes, sir. Regarding the pension policy, like return migration during Corona time, like COVID-19 time, as Mr. Swadesh said, yes, many migrant workers have returned. That was because of the pandemic. Apart from that, now ma'am has said that many companies or lay off the employees. Similarly, even in GCC, this thing happened post Corona and before also, pre-Corona also. So the workers who are visiting to India, they are not getting any benefits or any support. Apart from that, another one about senior citizens, like there are many Indians from different states, part of mostly if you see from South India, like Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, Kerala, and Andhra Pradesh. Telangana, I didn't come across the domestic workers who are stayed here for more than 20 or 30 years. But but from other states, yes, I have worked with them. When they want to retire and go back, they are so scared because they don't have anything. They are in old age, and local senior citizens, they are getting pension. But when these people are going, they are not getting anything. So is any state has implemented that pension policy where these citizens can, I mean, senior citizens can get pension, where we have to go, how we have to do?
Yeah.
So it's more of question.
Very good observation, both of you. Any
Yeah, sir. One thing is, it's a big problem to migrant workers, ma'am. If in Gulf countries especially, if he was stay in 20, 30 years in one company, sometimes he coming for the vacations, but 20 years, 30 years he spent in that destination countries. When he coming back to the source country, it's a very big problem to access to some government schemes and everything new to him. For the it's a challenge, ma'am. And
Even
Vijaya
they
said
don't have ration card or voter cards.
sometimes entitlements also lose. That is in the time of COVID-19, ma'am, they lose their wages, end of service benefits in Gulf countries. They simply said after you reaching your source country, we will send through bank accounts, but they didn't paid their back wages. That is a big loss when they back to return home country. Thank you.
I think for Sabah and all of you, I think there are two one country at least, Philippines, and one state within India, Kerala, Norca route. You can go to their website and you see how rehabilitation, return migration, funding, and kind of, other support system for the return migrants are there. Especially in Kerala, they have given banking loan and other facility, entrepreneurship facilities and all for return migrant. And all these are given in the Norca routes. That website is available. And same thing for Philippines also. So these two are very good, role model
To return is a
for return migrants.
ma'am, a right to return.
Right to return.
Time of Corona, the government arranged Vande Bharat mission flights, but the flights are not sufficient to coming back to the migrant workers, and they give a chance to arrange chartered flights. But in this time, the government didn't help much better to the migrant workers to reach their destination. In the time of Kuwait war and Iraq, that time the government taken initiation to lift them all safely to reaching their home. That is a big issue happened last 3 years ago, ma'am. Over.
Anything from Sabah?
No, I think that all these people actually made very interesting comments based on their own personal experience and their interest on this topic on return migrants. Like you also mentioned the Norca routes, that is something, one particular state is of course offering rehabilitation scheme, but what about the other states? How do we handle migration, returnees coming to these other states? So these are some interesting things that we need to consider and probably explore more.
In fact, there are some government policies of central government like Pravasi Bima and some of the policies which actually one way help the return migration and rehabilitation. But overall, I think there is a long way to go because return migration only Kerala experienced in a large scale, but after COVID or during COVID, many other states are experiencing. So it is a new phenomenon, and policies are not yet, sufficiently dealt with this. Okay, so
sir, my question was about the senior citizens who wish to. Let's keep the corona pandemic effects and all. Now I'm talking about the senior citizens, like they have spent 30 to 40 years over here. Of course, they have earned also, but when they are coming back to India and they are very old, they are not in a position to work, and the savings what they have is okay for them for a few years, but accessing the medical facilities or security, that is more important. It's not that the moment you land in airport and somebody kidnap you or do something, that is another thing. But senior citizens, when they go over there, they need a security. They are going to stay all alone. Recently, Tamil Nadu government announced, it happened 15 to 20 days ago, I think, that they will provide security to their families and senior citizens, NRIs families and senior citizens. They have to just give the details about their family, even from here, and then they will provide the security. But in other state, it did not happen. Only in Tamil Nadu, the Stalin government has announced.
Okay.
Particularly, I am worried about the Maharashtra, because most of the people living in Kuwait, they are from Karnataka and Maharashtra. So they have spent more than 20 to 30 years in Kuwait, and then they have left the country for good. So they need security. So how we can implement this, sir?
Yes. So in fact, as the migration is increasing, in fact, if you see the demography of India, China, global South, global North, if you take a big picture, see next few decades, India will be leading in international migration because it has a median age of 34 or 32, and the working class population is a very huge. And if you see the other countries, they're reducing, India will be leading, and some African countries and all. they'll be leading. So we have to see lots of migration is happening, lots of return migration also happening, and where we stand, what kind of best policy, and this kind of discussion should lead to give some kinds of feedback, because if we see the migration exports are very less across the world, and many of these issues, in fact, we should also throw light as a scholar. So on policies, on every aspect. You see, being in academics, we have the advantage of studying others, comparing other countries and all, which many times policymakers, they forget, and they do with the reactionary policy, something calm, they do policy, whether it is any state government or Indian government, under pressure they build policy. But in academics and whatever program we are doing, we should, in a leisurely, we should observe things and compare and see where we stand. So lots of policy input is required for handling this rehabilitation, return migration, circular migration. As we see, circular migration also will increase, because there is no permanent citizenship in GCC country. Many other countries will have too much, except I think Canada and some countries, citizenship also restricted now. So you'll have more, return migration, more circular type of migration. So we have to see future in this, this kind of situation, and see how best policy we can do. So with this, I think we'll conclude. And thank you, Dr. Sabah, for this interesting talk. We'll meet again next Saturday.
Thank you, sir.